Every morning at 4:30 a.m., while the rest of the city was still asleep, a 8-year-old man named Harold Benson woke up in his small apartment on the edge of town. He would make himself a cup of black coffee, sit by the window for exactly 10 minutes, and watch the streetlights flicker off one by one as the sky turned from black to gray. Then he would put on his faded blue work shirt, grab his lunch bag, and walk 3 blocks to catch the first bus of the day. For 12 years, this had been his routine. And for 12 years, hardly anyone had noticed. Harold worked as a janitor at the Eastwood Conservatory of Music. It was one of the most respected music schools in the country. Students came from all over the world to study there. Famous musicians had walked its halls. The building itself was beautiful, with high ceilings, marble floors, and tall windows that let the sunlight pour in like honey. It smelled like old wood and polish, and something else that Harold could never quite name. Something that made his chest feel tight every time he breathed it in. His job was simple. He mopped the floors. He emptied the trash cans. He cleaned the bathrooms and wiped down the door handles and made sure the hallways were spotless before the first students arrived. It was not glamorous work. It was not the kind of job people dreamed about when they were young. But Harold did it well. He took pride in it, and most importantly, it allowed him to be close to the one thing he had loved his entire life: music. You see, Harold had a secret he had carried with him for more than 40 years, a secret that weighed on his heart like a stone at the bottom of a river. When Harold was a young man, back in the early 1972s, he had been a pianist. Not just any pianist. He had been one of the most promising young talents in the country. His teachers said he had a gift. His fingers moved across the keys like water flowing over rocks. When he played, people stopped what they were doing and listened. They said he had something special, something rare, something that could not be taught. By the time he was 23, Harold had already performed at concert halls in New York and Chicago. Critics wrote about him in newspapers. He was invited to compete in international competitions. Everyone said the same thing. This young man was going to be a star. This young man was going to change the world of classical music. And then, on a rainy night in October 1975, everything changed. Harold was driving home from a rehearsal. The roads were wet and slick. A truck ran a red light at an intersection. Harold never saw it coming. The impact was so violent that it pushed his car into a telephone pole. Glass shattered, metal twisted. And when Harold woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed, he could not feel his right hand. The doctors told him the damage was severe. His hand had been crushed in the accident. They had done everything they could to save it. 3 surgeries, months of physical therapy, slow, painful exercises that made him want to scream. In the end, he regained most of the movement. He could hold a cup. He could write his name. He could button his shirt, but he could never play the piano again. Not the way he used to. Not the way that mattered. The news broke something inside Harold that no surgery could fix. He fell into a deep sadness that lasted for years. He stopped talking to his friends. He stopped going to concerts. He could not even bear to hear piano music on the radio. It hurt too much. Every note reminded him of what he had lost. Every melody was a ghost of the life he was supposed to live. Eventually, Harold packed away his dreams and tried to move on. He took odd jobs here and there. He worked in factories and warehouses. He drove delivery trucks. He did whatever he could to pay the bills and keep himself busy. He got married to a kind woman named Ruth, who never once asked him to play for her because she understood. They had a quiet life together. Not unhappy, but not complete either. There was always something missing. A hole in the center of everything that Harold learned to walk around, but never learned to fill. Ruth passed away 8 years ago. Cancer. It happened quickly. One day, she was planting tomatoes in their little backyard garden. 3 months later, she was gone. After the funeral, Harold found himself alone in a way he had never been before. The apartment felt too big. The silence felt too loud. He did not know what to do with himself. That was when he saw the job listing for a night janitor at the Eastwood Conservatory. He almost did not apply. The thought of being surrounded by music again, of hearing students practice and professors teach, of walking past grand pianos every single day. It seemed like torture. Why would he put himself through that? Why would he choose to stand so close to everything he had lost? But something pulled him toward it. Something he could not explain. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the small, stubborn part of him that still remembered what it felt like to sit at a piano bench and feel like anything was possible. He got the job. And from his very first night, Harold fell in love with the place. He would arrive in the late afternoon, just as the last classes were ending. He would watch the students hurry through the halls with their instrument cases and sheet music. He would hear fragments of symphonies drifting out from practice rooms. He would stand in the doorway of the main concert hall and look at the stage where so many great musicians had performed. And even though it made his heart ache, it also made him feel alive in a way he had not felt in decades. The students never paid much attention to him. To them, he was just the old man with the mop. They rushed past him on their way to class. They stepped around his bucket without looking up from their phones. Sometimes they would nod or say a quick hello, but their eyes were always somewhere else. Harold did not blame them. He remembered what it was like to be young and hungry and certain that the whole world was waiting for you. He remembered thinking that he had all the time in the world. He remembered believing that nothing bad would ever happen to him. The professors were polite but distant. They knew his face but not his name. They smiled when they passed him in the hallway, but never stopped to talk. Why would they? He was the janitor. He cleaned up after them. He was part of the background, like the walls and the floors and the lights in the ceiling. Necessary, but invisible. And Harold was fine with that. He had learned long ago not to expect too much from people. He had learned to find comfort in small things. The smell of lemon polish on wood, the echo of his footsteps in an empty hallway, the way the moonlight came through the tall windows at night and made the marble floors glow like silver. But sometimes, late at night, when everyone had gone home and the building was completely silent, Harold would stop outside the main concert hall. He would press his hand against the heavy wooden door and close his eyes. And he would remember what it felt like to walk onto a stage, to sit down at a piano, to take a deep breath and place his fingers on the keys. He would remember the music that used to live inside him. And he would wonder if it was still there, somewhere deep down, waiting to be found. Then he would pick up his mop and get back to work, because that was his life now. And he had made peace with it, or at least, he thought he had. It was a Thursday night in late November, when everything changed. Harold remembered the date because it was the anniversary of Ruth's passing. 8 years to the day. He had visited her grave that morning, stood there in the cold for almost an hour, and talked to her the way he always did. He told her about the weather, about the birds he had seen outside his window, about the small things that made up his days. He did not cry. He had run out of tears a long time ago. But the heaviness in his chest stayed with him all day, like a weight he could not put down. By the time he got to work that evening, Harold was not feeling like himself. His body was tired, but his mind would not stop moving. Memories kept floating up from somewhere deep inside him. Memories of Ruth. Memories of the life they had shared. And older memories, too. Memories of concert halls and applause, and the feeling of sitting at a piano with the whole world waiting to hear what he would play. He tried to focus on his work. He mopped the hallways on the first floor. He emptied the trash in the practice rooms. He cleaned the bathrooms and restocked the paper towels. But his heart was not in it. His hands moved automatically while his thoughts drifted somewhere far away. By 10 o'clock, the building was almost empty. Most of the students had gone home. The lights in the classrooms were off. The hallways were quiet except for the hum of the heating system and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Harold liked this time of night. It felt like the building belonged to him, like he was the only person left in the world. He finished his rounds on the second floor and made his way down the main staircase. His footsteps echoed in the silence. At the bottom of the stairs, he turned left toward the supply closet where he kept his cart. But something made him stop. The door to the main concert hall was open. This was unusual. The concert hall was always locked at night. Students were not allowed inside without permission. The grand piano on the stage was worth more than most people made in a year. It was a Steinway, one of the finest instruments in the world, and the school protected it like a treasure. Harold stood in the hallway and looked at the open door. A thin strip of light spilled out onto the marble floor. Someone must have forgotten to lock up. He should close it and move on. That was the responsible thing to do. That was what a good janitor would do. But instead, he found himself walking toward the door. His feet moved before his brain could catch up. It was like something was pulling him forward. Something he could not see, or name, or understand. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The concert hall was dark except for a single maintenance light near the back of the stage. It cast a pale yellow glow over the empty seats and the high ceiling and the heavy curtains that hung along the walls. The room smelled like dust and velvet and old wood. It smelled like history. Like all the music that had ever been played here was still hanging in the air, waiting to be heard again. And there, in the center of the stage, sat the piano. Harold's breath caught in his throat. He had seen this piano 100 times before. He had cleaned around it. He had dusted the bench. He had polished the legs until they shone, but he had never let himself really look at it. He had never let himself feel what it meant. Tonight was different. Tonight, something inside him cracked open. He walked down the center aisle between the rows of empty seats. His footsteps were soft on the carpet. His heart was beating so hard, he could feel it in his ears. When he reached the stage, he stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked up at the piano like it was an old friend he had not seen in 40 years. Because that was exactly what it was. Harold climbed the steps slowly. His knees ached. His back was stiff. He was not a young man anymore. But in that moment, he did not feel old. He felt like he was 23 again, walking onto a stage in New York City, about to perform for the first time in front of a real audience. He reached the piano and stood beside it for a long time. He ran his fingers along the smooth black surface. It was cool to the touch. Perfect. Beautiful. He pulled out the bench and sat down. The leather was soft beneath him. The keys stretched out in front of him, like a path leading somewhere he had forgotten how to go. His hands were shaking. He looked down at them. These hands that had once been called gifted. These hands that had made people cry with their music. These hands that had been broken and healed and never quite the same. They were old now, wrinkled, spotted with age. The scars from the accident were still visible on his right hand, faded white lines that told a story he never talked about. He placed his fingers on the keys. The ivory was smooth and cool. It felt familiar. It felt like coming home. For a moment, he just sat there. He did not move. He did not breathe. He was afraid. Afraid that he had forgotten everything. Afraid that his hands would not work. Afraid that the music was gone forever and he would never get it back. And then, without thinking, he pressed a single key. The note rang out in the empty hall. It hung in the air like a bird spreading its wings. It was pure and clear and beautiful. And something inside, Harold broke loose. He pressed another key, and another. His fingers started to move on their own, finding patterns they had not played in over 4 decades. The music came back to him like water rushing through a dam that had finally cracked. Slowly at first. Then, faster. Then, all at once. He was playing Chopin. The Ballade No. 1-inch G minor. It had been his favorite piece when he was young. He had performed it dozens of times. He knew every note, every phrase, every breath. And now, after 43 years of silence, it was pouring out of him like it had been waiting all this time. His right hand was stiff. Some of the fast passages were clumsy. He missed notes here and there. But it did not matter. The music was alive. It filled the concert hall and bounced off the walls and rose up to the ceiling like a prayer. Tears started rolling down Harold's face. He did not try to stop them. He did not even notice them at first. He just kept playing. He played for Ruth. He played for the young man he used to be. He played for all the years he had lost and all the dreams he had buried. He played for the silence that had lived inside him for so long. When he finally reached the last chord, he let his hands rest on the keys and sat completely still. The sound faded slowly, like the last light of the sun disappearing below the horizon. And then there was silence again. But it was a different kind of silence now. It was not empty. It was full. Full of everything he had just released. Harold sat at that piano for a long time. He did not know how long. Minutes. Maybe an hour. He just sat there with his eyes closed and his hands in his lap. Feeling something he had not felt in 43 years. He felt whole. He did not notice the small red light blinking in the corner of the room. He did not know that a security camera had been recording the entire time. He did not know that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. All he knew was that for the first time since the accident, he had played the piano. And it had not killed him. It had brought him back to life. When he finally stood up, his legs were stiff and his back was sore. He pushed in the bench, closed the lid over the keys, and walked off the stage. He picked up his mop from where he had dropped it in the aisle. He looked back at the piano one more time. Then he turned off the light and closed the door behind him. He finished his shift that night like nothing had happened. He clocked out at his usual time. He caught the early bus home. He made himself a cup of tea and sat by the window and watched the sun come up. But everything was different now. He could feel it in his bones. Something had woken up inside him. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time, and he had no idea what would happen next. The next morning, a security guard named Thomas arrived at the conservatory to start his shift. He was a quiet man in his 50s who had worked at the school for nearly 20 years. His job was simple. He watched the cameras, checked the doors, and made sure nothing went wrong during the night. Most of the time, nothing ever did. The footage was boring. Empty hallways, flickering lights, maybe a mouse running across the floor once in a while. Thomas had seen it all 1,000 times. But this morning was different. Thomas sat down at his desk with a cup of coffee and started reviewing the footage from the previous night. He fast-forwarded through the usual stuff. Students leaving. Professors locking up their offices. The cleaning crew making their rounds. Nothing interesting. Nothing unusual. And then he saw it. He almost missed it at first. It was just a shadow moving across the screen. But something made him stop and rewind. He leaned closer to the monitor and watched as the door to the main concert hall slowly opened. A figure stepped inside. Thomas squinted at the screen. It was the old janitor, the quiet one who always kept to himself. Harold something. Thomas could not remember his last name. He watched Harold walk down the aisle toward the stage. He watched him climb the steps and sit down at the piano. And then Thomas's jaw dropped. The old man started to play. Thomas had worked at a music school for 2 decades. He had heard countless students practice. He had listened to professors perform at recitals. He knew what good piano playing sounded like, but this was something else. This was not just good. This was extraordinary. The security cameras did not record the best audio. The sound was tinny and distant. But even through the cheap speakers on his computer, Thomas could hear the beauty of what Harold was playing. The notes rose and fell like waves. The melody was sad and powerful and full of something Thomas could not put into words. He sat there frozen, watching the old janitor pour his heart out on a piano in an empty concert hall at midnight. When the video ended, Thomas did not know what to do. He rewound it and watched it again. Then he watched it a third time. He could not believe what he was seeing. The janitor, the quiet old man with the mop and the faded blue shirt. He played the piano like a master. Thomas knew he had to show someone. But who? He thought about it for a moment, then picked up his phone and called Professor Chen, the head of the piano department. She was one of the few people at the school who always said hello to Thomas in the hallways. She treated him like a person, not like part of the furniture. He trusted her. Professor Chen answered on the third ring. Her voice was sleepy and confused. It was still early in the morning. Thomas apologized for calling so early, then told her she needed to come see something right away. Something important. Something she would not believe unless she saw it with her own eyes. 20 minutes later, Professor Chen was standing in the security office, staring at the screen with her hand over her mouth. She watched the entire video without saying a word. When it finished, she turned to Thomas with tears in her eyes. "Play it again," she said. Thomas played it again, and again. By the fourth time, 2 other professors had crowded into the small office to see what was going on. Word spread quickly. By lunchtime, it seemed like half the faculty had watched the video. People whispered in the hallways. They gathered in small groups and talked in hushed voices. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Who was this man? And why was he mopping floors instead of performing on stages? That afternoon, Harold arrived at work at his usual time. He had no idea what was waiting for him. He clocked in, grabbed his cart, and started making his way to the first floor. But before he could get very far, a young woman from the administrative office appeared in front of him. "Mr. Benson," she said. "Dean Williams would like to see you in her office." Harold's stomach dropped. The dean. He had never spoken to the dean in all his years at the school. He had seen her from a distance at events and ceremonies, but they had never exchanged a single word. She was an important woman, busy, powerful. His first thought was that he was in trouble. Maybe someone had seen him in the concert hall last night. Maybe he had broken some rule he did not know about. Maybe they were going to fire him for touching the piano. His heart started pounding as he followed the young woman through the hallways and up the stairs to the administrative wing. The dean's office was large and elegant, with tall windows and dark wooden furniture. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Awards and certificates hung in frames. It smelled like leather and old paper. Harold felt completely out of place in his work clothes and scuffed shoes. Dean Williams was sitting behind her desk when he walked in. She was a woman in her early 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes. She wore a dark blazer and a string of pearls around her neck. She looked like the kind of person who had never mopped a floor in her life. But when she saw Harold, she smiled. It was a warm smile. A real one. "Please, sit down," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Harold sat. His hands were trembling. He folded them in his lap so she would not see. For a moment, the dean just looked at him. She studied his face like she was trying to read a book, written in a language she did not quite understand. Then, she spoke. "Mr. Benson, I want to show you something." She turned her computer monitor so he could see the screen. Then she pressed play. Harold watched himself walk into the concert hall. He watched himself sit down at the piano. He watched himself play Chopin with tears streaming down his face. The blood drained from his cheeks. His mouth went dry. He had been so careful. He had been so sure. He was alone. When the video ended, he could not look at the dean. He stared at the floor and waited for her to tell him to pack his things and leave. But that is not what happened. "Mr. Benson," the dean said softly. "Who are you?" Harold looked up. Her eyes were not angry. They were curious, maybe even kind. He did not know what to say. He had not told anyone his story in years. He had buried it so deep that sometimes he forgot it himself. But something about the way she was looking at him made the words start to come. He told her everything. The concerts when he was young, the praise from critics, the dreams of a career on the world's greatest stages. Then, the accident, the rain, the truck, the crushing of his hand, the surgeries that saved his fingers but stole his future, the decades of silence, the grief that never fully went away. The dean listened without interrupting. She did not take notes. She did not check her phone. She just listened, her hands folded on the desk in front of her, her eyes never leaving his face. When Harold finished, the room was quiet. He felt empty, like he had poured out everything inside him, and there was nothing left. Then Dean Williams leaned forward and said something that changed his life. "Mr. Benson, we have a charity gala in 2 weeks. The biggest donors in the city will be there. The most important names in music. I want you to perform." Harold stared at her. He must have misheard. He must have misunderstood. "I'm sorry?" he said. "I want you to play the piano at our gala. On that stage. In front of everyone." Harold shook his head. The idea was impossible. Ridiculous. He was 68 years old. He had not performed in public since before most of the students at this school were born. His hand was damaged. His skills were rusty. He was a janitor. "For heaven's sake, I can't," he said. "I'm too old. I'm not ready. I haven't played for an audience in over 40 years. The dean smiled again. That same, warm, knowing smile. "Mr. Benson," she said, "I just watched you play, and I have been in this business for a very long time. Trust me when I tell you that you are more ready than you think." Harold opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. He did not know what to say. He did not know what to feel. Part of him wanted to run out of the office and never come back. Part of him wanted to cry. And part of him, a small part buried deep in his chest, wanted to say yes. He stood up slowly. His legs felt weak beneath him. "Can I think about it?" he asked. The dean nodded. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But Harold, if I may call you that, I hope you will consider it. Not for me, not for the school, but for yourself, for the young man you used to be, for the musician who never got his chance." Harold walked out of the office in a daze. He did not remember the walk back to the supply closet. He did not remember picking up his mop. He just stood there in the dim light, surrounded by buckets and brooms, trying to understand what had just happened. Someone had seen him play. Someone had listened. And now, they were asking him to do the one thing he had spent 43 years believing he would never do again. The question was simple. The answer was not. Could he really do this? Could he really step back onto a stage after all these years? He did not know. But for the first time in a very long time, he was not sure the answer was no. That night, Harold could not sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows move across the walls as cars passed by outside. His mind would not stop spinning. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the dean's face. He heard her words. He felt the weight of the decision pressing down on his chest like a heavy stone. Perform at the gala, in front of hundreds of people. After 43 years of silence, the idea terrified him. It was not just the fear of failure, though that was part of it. It was something deeper, something harder to explain. For more than 4 decades, Harold had built his life around the belief that his days as a pianist were over. He had accepted it. He had made peace with it. Or at least, he thought he had. Now someone was asking him to tear down everything he had spent so long building and step back into a world he had walked away from a lifetime ago. What if he could not do it? What if he got on that stage and his hands froze? What if his mind went blank and he forgot every note he had ever learned? What if he made a fool of himself in front of all those important people? The thought made his stomach turn. But there was another fear too, a quieter one. a fear that whispered in the back of his mind when the room was dark and still. What if he could do it? What if he played well? What if people clapped and cheered and told him he was wonderful? Then what? He would have to face everything he had lost. He would have to look at his life and ask himself the questions he had been avoiding for 43 years. What could he have become if the accident had never happened? How different would his life have been? How much had he missed? Sometimes it was easier to stay invisible. Sometimes it was safer to keep your dreams buried where no one could see them. That way, no one could take them away from you again. Harold got out of bed around 3 in the morning. He knew sleep was not coming. He made himself a cup of tea and sat in the small living room of his apartment. The room was simple and neat. A worn sofa, a wooden coffee table, a bookshelf filled with old novels and photo albums, and on the mantel, above the electric fireplace, a framed photograph of Ruth. She was smiling in the picture. It had been taken on their 30th wedding anniversary, at a little restaurant by the lake where they used to go for special occasions. Her hair was silver by then, but her eyes were still bright, still full of life, still full of love. Harold picked up the photograph and held it in his hands. He looked at her face for a long time. "What should I do, Ruth?" he said quietly. Of course, the photograph did not answer. But in his mind, Harold could hear her voice. He could hear the things she used to say to him when he was struggling, when he was afraid, when he did not believe in himself. Ruth had always believed in him. Even after the accident, when he was angry and bitter and impossible to live with, she never gave up on him. She never stopped loving him, and she never stopped hoping that one day, somehow, he would find his way back to the music. He remembered a conversation they had just a few months before she got sick. They were sitting on the back porch, watching the sun go down. Ruth had turned to him and said something he had never forgotten. "Harold," she said, "you gave up the piano because you were hurt. I understand that. But you never stopped being a musician. It's still in there. I can see it every time you hear a beautiful piece of music. Your whole face changes. Your eyes light up. It's like watching someone remember who they really are." Harold had shaken his head. "That part of my life is over," he said. "It's been over for a long time." Ruth had reached over and taken his hand. Her fingers were warm and soft. "Nothing is ever really over," she said. "Not until you decide it is." Now, sitting alone in his apartment all these years later, Harold felt those words hit him in a new way. Ruth was gone. She would never hear him play again. But maybe that was exactly why he needed to do this. Not for the dean, not for the school, not even for himself. For Ruth. For the woman who had stood by him through everything. For the woman who had believed in him, even when he could not believe in himself. Harold put the photograph back on the mantel. He stood there for a moment, looking at her smile. Then, he walked to the closet in the hallway and opened the door. In the back of the closet, behind old coats and boxes of things he had not touched in years, there was a small trunk. Harold pulled it out and set it on the floor. His hands trembled as he lifted the lid. Inside were the things he had saved from his old life. Concert programs with his name printed on the front. Newspaper clippings with reviews of his performances. A photograph of him at 22, sitting at a grand piano in a concert hall in Chicago, wearing a black tuxedo and smiling like he owned the world. And at the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in a piece of old cloth, was something he had not looked at in decades. A medal. A small gold medal he had won at a competition in New York City when he was 23 years old, just 6 months before the accident. Harold held the medal in his palm. It was heavier than he remembered. He ran his thumb over the engraved letters. First place. Piano. 1,975. He had been so proud of this medal once. It had meant everything to him. It was proof that he was good. Proof that he had a future. And then, in one terrible moment, That future had been taken away. For 43 years, this medal had stayed hidden in a trunk, in a closet, in the back of his life. He had not been able to throw it away, but he had not been able to look at it either. It hurt too much. Now, for the first time, Harold did not feel pain when he looked at it. He felt something else. Something like hope. Maybe Ruth was right. Maybe nothing was ever really over. Maybe the music was still inside him, waiting. Maybe he had just been too scared to let it out. He thought about the students at the conservatory. The young people who rushed past him every day, chasing their dreams. They had no idea how fragile those dreams were. They had no idea how quickly everything could change. And they had no idea that the old man with the mop had once been just like them. What if he could show them something? What if he could stand on that stage and prove that dreams do not have an expiration date? That it is never too late to be who you were meant to be? The more he thought about it, the more the fear began to fade. It did not disappear completely. It was still there, lurking in the corners of his mind. But it was not as loud as before. It was not as powerful. By the time the sun came up, Harold had made his decision. He went to work that day at his usual time. He clocked in. He grabbed his cart. And then, he walked straight to Dean Williams' office. The young woman at the desk looked surprised to see him, but she waved him through. The dean was sitting at her desk, reading some papers. She looked up when Harold walked in. Her eyebrows rose slightly, but she did not say anything. She just waited. Harold stood in front of her desk. His heart was pounding. His mouth was dry. But his voice was steady when he spoke. "I'll do it," he said. "I'll play at the gala." The dean's face broke into a wide smile. She stood up and reached across the desk to shake his hand. "Mr. Benson, you have no idea how happy that makes me." Harold shook her hand. Then he took a deep breath and said the second part. "But I have one condition." The dean tilted her head. "What is it?" "I want to perform in my work clothes," Harold said. "My janitor uniform. The same clothes I wear every day." The dean looked confused. "May I ask why?" Harold thought for a moment before answering. He wanted to get the words right. "Because I want people to see me," he said. "Not the version of me they expect. Not a man in a fancy suit pretending to be something he's not. I want them to see the janitor, the old man, with the mop. And then I want them to hear me play. I want them to understand that you can't judge a person by what they look like or what job they have. I want them to know that there's more to people than what you see on the surface." The dean was quiet for a long moment. She studied his face the same way she had the day before. Then she nodded slowly. "Mr. Benson," she said, "I think that's a wonderful idea." Harold walked out of the office feeling lighter than he had in years. The fear was still there. The doubt was still there. But underneath it all, there was something new. Something he had not felt since he was a young man with the whole world in front of him. He felt alive. 2 weeks. He had 2 weeks to prepare. 2 weeks to practice. 2 weeks to get ready for the moment that would change everything. He had no idea if he was ready. But he was going to find out. The night of the gala arrived faster than Harold expected. One moment he was agreeing to perform, and the next he was standing backstage in the concert hall, listening to the sound of 300 people taking their seats on the other side of the curtain. His hands were shaking. His mouth was dry. His heart was beating so fast he thought it might burst right out of his chest. He had practiced every day for the past 2 weeks. He had played the Chopin piece over and over until his fingers knew every note by memory. But now, standing here in the darkness behind the stage, all that practice felt like nothing. All he could feel was fear. He looked down at his clothes. His faded blue work shirt, his gray trousers with the small stain on the knee that would not come out no matter how many times he washed them. His old black shoes, scuffed and worn from years of walking the same hallways. He looked exactly like what he was. A janitor. A 68-year-old man who cleaned floors for a living. Part of him wanted to run. Part of him wanted to slip out the back door and disappear into the night and pretend this had never happened. No one would blame him. No one would judge him. He could go back to his quiet life and his empty apartment and his memories of what could have been. But then he thought of Ruth. He thought of her smile. He thought of her voice telling him that nothing was ever really over. And he knew he could not walk away. Not this time. Not again. A young woman with a clipboard appeared beside him. She was one of the event coordinators, dressed in a black dress with her hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Mr. Benson, you're on in 5 minutes." Harold nodded. He could not speak. His throat was too tight. The young woman looked at him for a moment. Then she did something unexpected. She reached out and touched his arm gently. "I watched the video," she said quietly. "The one from the security camera. I just wanted you to know. It was beautiful. You're going to be wonderful." Harold looked at her. Her eyes were kind, sincere. He managed a small smile. "Thank you," he whispered. She nodded and walked away. Harold took a deep breath. Then, another. He closed his eyes and tried to calm his racing heart. 5 minutes later, the lights in the concert hall dimmed. The crowd fell silent. Dean Williams walked onto the stage and stood behind the microphone. Harold could hear her voice through the speakers, welcoming the guests, thanking them for their generosity, talking about the importance of music education. Then she said his name. "Tonight, we have a very special performance for you. Some of you may have heard the story already. Some of you may not. But I promise you, what you are about to witness is something truly extraordinary. Please welcome to the stage, Mr. Harold Benson. Please. Mr. Harold. Please." There was polite applause. The sound of hands clapping out of courtesy, not excitement. Harold took one last breath. Then he stepped out from behind the curtain and walked onto the stage. The lights were bright, blinding. He could barely see the audience, but he could feel them. 300 pairs of eyes staring at him. 300 people wondering why an old man in a janitor's uniform was walking toward the grand piano. He heard the whispers start almost immediately. Confused murmurs rippling through the crowd. He saw a few people exchange glances. He saw one man in the front row lean over to his wife and say something with a smirk on his face. Someone near the back laughed. A short, surprised laugh that echoed in the silence. Harold kept walking. His legs felt heavy. His feet felt like they were made of lead. But he did not stop. He did not look down. He kept his eyes fixed on the piano. When he reached the bench, he stood there for a moment. He looked out at the audience. He could see their faces now. Some looked curious. Some looked skeptical. Some looked like they were waiting for a joke. They did not know what to make of him. They did not understand. That was okay. They would understand soon enough. Harold sat down. He adjusted the bench slightly. He placed his hands on his lap and took one more breath. The concert hall was completely silent now. So silent, he could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. He thought of Ruth. He thought of the young man he used to be. He thought of 43 years of silence and all the music that had been locked inside him, waiting to be set free. Then he lifted his hands and placed his fingers on the keys. The first note rang out like a bell, clear and pure and perfect. It hung in the air for a moment, suspended in time. And then the music began. Harold played Chopin's Ballade No. 1-inch G minor, the same piece he had played alone in this hall 2 weeks ago. The same piece he had performed in concert halls across the country when he was young. The same piece that had lived in his heart for 43 years, waiting for this moment. His fingers moved across the keys like water. The melody rose and fell, soft and then powerful, gentle and then fierce. He did not think about the audience. He did not think about his fear. He did not think about anything except the music. It poured out of him like a river breaking through a dam. It filled the concert hall and rose up to the ceiling and wrapped around every person in the room. The whispers stopped. The smirks disappeared. The skeptical faces softened. One by one, the people in the audience began to understand. They began to feel what Harold was playing. Not just the notes, not just the technique, but the emotion underneath. The years of pain, the years of loss, the years of silence. And underneath all of that, the love. The love for the music that had never died. A woman in the third row started to cry. She did not even realize it at first. The tears just came, rolling down her cheeks as the music washed over her. She was not alone. All around the hall, people were wiping their eyes. People were holding their breath. People were experiencing something they had not expected. Something real. Something true. Harold played for 12 minutes. It felt like 12 seconds. It felt like a lifetime. When he finally struck the last chord, he let his hands rest on the keys and bowed his head. The final notes faded slowly into silence. For a moment, nothing happened. The concert hall was completely still. Harold sat at the piano with his eyes closed, afraid to look up, afraid to see disappointment on their faces, afraid that it had not been enough. And then, someone started clapping. It was one person at first, then 2, then 10, then the whole room. The applause grew and grew until it was thunderous. People rose to their feet. One row, then another, then the entire audience. 300 people standing and clapping and cheering for the old man in the janitor's uniform. Harold looked up. Tears were streaming down his face. He could not believe what he was seeing. He could not believe what he was hearing. After 43 years of silence, people were standing for him. People were clapping for him. People were seeing him. He stood slowly, his legs trembling beneath him. He took a small bow. The applause continued. It did not stop. It went on, wave after wave, filling the concert hall with a sound Harold thought he would never hear again. Backstage, after the applause had finally faded, a young student approached him. She was a girl of about 19, with long dark hair and bright eyes. She looked at him with something like wonder. "Mr. Benson," she said, "can I ask you something?" Harold nodded. He still could not quite find his voice. "Why did you wear the uniform? Why didn't you dress up like everyone else?" Harold thought about the question. He had asked himself the same thing 100 times. Now, standing here in the afterglow of the greatest moment of his life, the answer seemed simple. "Because I wanted people to remember something," he said. "I wanted them to remember that dreams don't have an expiration date, and neither do the people who carry them. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter what job you have. It doesn't matter what people see when they look at you. What matters is what's inside. What matters is the thing you carry in your heart, even when no one else knows it's there." The girl looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled. "Thank you," she said. She walked away. Harold watched her go. He hoped she would remember this night. He hoped she would remember that it is never too late. A week later, someone posted the video of Harold's performance online. Within days, it had been viewed by millions of people around the world. News stations picked up the story. Reporters called the conservatory asking for interviews. Harold Benson, the 68-year-old janitor who played piano like a master, became an overnight sensation. But Harold did not care about the fame. He did not care about the attention. What he cared about was the music. What he cared about was the fact that after 43 years, he had finally found his way back to the thing he loved most. He kept working at the conservatory. He still mopped the floors and emptied the trash cans. But now, the students smiled at him when they passed. They stopped to say hello. They asked him about his music, about his life, about the dreams he had carried for so long. And sometimes, late at night, when the building was empty and quiet, Harold would sit down at the piano in the concert hall and play. Not for an audience, not for applause, just for himself, just for Ruth, just for the joy of it. Because that was the lesson Harold had learned. The one he hoped the world would remember. It is never too late to become who you were meant to be. It is never too late to chase the dream you thought you had lost. And it is never too late to sit down at a piano, place your fingers on the keys, and let the music inside you finally be heard.